Good afternoon, everyone. Invite the last people to take a seat and make themselves comfortable. Welcome all to this Innovation Fund matchmaking event organized by BEPA, the Batteries European Partnership Association. For those who don't know, my name is Wouter IJzermans. I'm the executive director of the Partnership Association. It's a day of firsts. Of course, the Innovation Fund targets first industrial deployment of innovation. It's the first round or first time that we now have this specific Innovation Fund call for batteries. And it's the first time that we decided to organize a matchmaking for it. So I welcome you all to join this wave of firsts. Open up, make it work. We're all figuring out how this thing works. We get some experts to tell us how exactly it's being done. But first of all, I want to thank you, all of you who has come to join us here. People from the BEPA community already, people who were outside who have not yet attended our event before, but to come and join us and talk about this. So thank you very much. And now I want to sort of start off and give the floor to somebody who also did a lot of firsts probably in the last year and has really moved this. I cannot move forward. Who really has moved this innovation idea for batteries on from the first idea that was announced by Vice President Šefčovič to the actual call that has now been published. So before we dive into the details and try to get to know each other, I will first want to give the floor to Evelina Daniel from DG Klima, who has worked on this for so long. So.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be today, and happy to join the wave of the first thing ever done. Indeed, in the Innovation Fund, we innovate also the fund itself, and not only look at the innovative projects. And this battery call is our first of a kind. It's the first time that we have a dedicated instrument for batteries. So yes, no PowerPoint today from my side. I do enough of them during the info days. So I will be speaking from head and also quite some from heart. So yes, thanks. First of all, I would like to say great to see room so full. Great to see this initiative of the matchmaking ahead of making applications to the Innovation Fund. It's not all sectors which are so well organized and so active. So yes, chapeau to you to get together and start thinking around the same table. I'm very happy to see that, and I will praise it at other sectoral initiatives where we make currently, visits to and publicize the opportunities under the Innovation Fund. So great, wishing you very successful day, and I will try to listen in a little bit to the conversations today. Now, as already mentioned, why we have this call? Well, there was urgency to act. There was political announcement that was in the context of the trade agreement with the UK, right? New conditions coming shortly. Better be ready for them. Of course, one call of the Innovation Fund, or even more of them, because we were talking about acting in the next 3 years. It will not solve it all, but it can help some players. It can help us prepare for those challenges coming from the trade agreements, and also in general, I would say, more challenging situation for the clean tech sector in Europe. We hear this feedback quite some from many different players that last year, beginning of this year, the conditions are more difficult. There used to be a lot of optimism. Now this optimism hits a little bit the reality, and therefore all the more we need successful projects to shine. We need them to come online. We need them even before online to reach final investment decision. So yes, we know the context, we know all the challenges, and yes, we think that with this instrument we can make a positive impact. Now, it was first for us, but we did not do it alone. Some of you will know very well that actually it is a pretty small team, both in DG Klima and in our executive agency, which is behind the scenes. So we wouldn't have done it without the stakeholder consultation. And I am actually seeing many faces that I have seen already. So yes, happy to see you again. And sort of, at the end, at least of this part of the journey, then we need to see, of course, the results of the call. So yes, we wouldn't have done it without your input. You remember at some point we even considered auction. Yeah, I mean, legitimate. I am also part of the hydrogen team. So, of course, after the success of the pilot auction on hydrogen, that was, let's say, a very fashionable instrument. And I think that for many users, it can still be a very useful one. So yeah, we had a very good discussion, but we also had a very good discussion about the features of so-called regular grants of the Innovation Fund. So glad that we could exchange, in all honesty, very freely. We really appreciate even, the criticism that was coming. It was all for the best, because thanks to that, we think that we have instrument which can work. So yeah, we should keep in touch. So when we have the first results, I will mention soon the timetable. We should take stock how the instrument work, and do we need to retweak it? Do we need to, we keep going because it works well, or we have to readjust? So yeah, that's so much for speaking about the context. Now, in terms of instruments itself, yes, we opened on the 3rd of December. If you miss info days, recording are available for the whole year. The budget that we have 1 billion, deadline end of April this year. And depending, of course, on the volume of projects received, we hope that we could give results of this call as fast as possible. Of course, the more projects, the longer it will take, but there is a big commitment from our colleagues in the executive agency to work as fast as possible. So yeah, at latest at the end of this year, we hope earlier than that. And you know that even though we stayed with the architecture of those so-called regular grants, where actually energy storage projects have been already extremely successful, storage as such, among all clean tech manufacturing, is the most successful one under the Innovation Fund, but not necessarily storage for electric vehicles. We had more to do with the stationary storage, okay, some upstream components which can serve for both, of course, recycling. So it was also a little bit a missing puzzle for us to have a more complete portfolio. So yes, curious of the outcomes right now when we have a fully dedicated instrument for the storage for the mobile users, I mean cell manufacturing to be precise. Yes, so we stayed within this architecture that already works well. I mean, judging at the level of subscription to the Innovation Fund calls year after year, it's a steady level. It's a good level of competition, and actually this competition works in a sense that we are bringing out the best projects for funding. So we stayed well within there, but you also know that we added additional award criteria. We also shortened a little bit the necessary monitoring period because we know that time is of the essence. So if there is a need, there can be a pretty fast disbursement. We allow monitoring for as little as 3 years after the entry into operation. So yeah, we understood that money has to go to the system pretty fast. And as to those additional award criteria, we understood that they were in sync with requirements also from the stakeholders. So paying attention to the carbon footprint, something totally brand new for the Innovation Fund. We always let it go. You take electricity, we assume it is a renewable one. It is zero carbon. And now we went into the fully developed, fully fledged methodology to reflect that indeed some of the players can be better in terms of how they manufacture the electric vehicle cells to give them therefore advantage in the evaluation. It was a lot of analytical work, but we think it is worth it. And after all, this is what battery regulation will soon bring as mandatory requirements. So you can consider that as a preparation for the upcoming requirements. And then the resilience requirements. I'm sure that we could have a long discussion whether they are ambitious enough or maybe whether they are too ambitious or maybe not ambitious enough. I think that we even had a discussion here in the corridor about foreign investments and what we think about it. But we listened very carefully to what was said at the stakeholder consultation. We understood that any very harsh requirements, hard thresholds, and actually it would be to the detriment of the whole instrument. So you certainly notice that we are actually quite open. Tell us how good you can be in, staying in creating this European added value, staying away from suppliers on which we have already overdependence. Tell us how good you can be, and then we see, but no hard thresholds, because we understood it would have been counterproductive. So yes, looking forward also to the assessment, how it will look like in the evaluation, and what lessons we learned from that. I heard you explaining first industrial deployment. That's actually the IPSI terminology. So just to maybe stress that scale up is absolutely fine for us. I mean, it doesn't be first of a kind. It can be a technology which already was deployed on smaller scale, and now it gets even bigger, as long as there is a funding gap. We are happy with those projects. So yeah, we try to pass this message at every opportunity. We are called Innovation Fund, but innovation, as we also have big priorities on the industrial policy, it can mean many things. So the scale up is absolutely fine. So we are actually a little bit post. I mean, IPSI projects are fine, but even post IPSIs, that would be our target. Yeah, that I wanted to stress. I mean, what I would also like to stress, I'm sure that colleagues who will speak after me will go into in depth into this. Carefully assess whether this is the batteries call for you, or maybe you would like to rather go to the net zero call, which has bigger budget. I mean, it's not a question of power gaming the system where there will be bigger competition and so on. It's really where you fit per our requirements. We really try to make this new battery instrument for the cells for electric vehicles or the integrated projects. So if it is about stationary storage, then it will be the net zero technologies call. If it will be big recycling projects with a little bit of battery cell manufacturing on the side, it will be more also the net zero call. So yeah, assess it carefully where you really fit. If you don't know, we are there for the help desk, including also colleagues from DG Klima. We are there to guide you. That would be really a shame, to misplace the application on a simple, where am I going? I mean, we are not losing anything from the eligibility of the previous Innovation Fund calls. So if you were eligible last year, now it is just a question: is it one call or the other? I presume for most of you it will be the batteries call. Pay attention to the deadlines, of course. I also want to say that in the next days we will have the Q&As on the call, and in a user-friendly format. So another first. Some of you maybe know that it used to be you had to scroll number of pages on the funding and tendering portal. I see the notes, and I'm actually feeling guilty about it that we haven't solved that earlier. So yes, it used to be a bit cumbersome, to put it mildly. Now we are going for a PDF document. You control F the term that you are looking for. Is it cumulation? Is it carbon footprint? And you should be able to find if this question was already asked and answered. You should find it so much easier. Yeah, sometimes it takes time to put simple solutions in our IT system, but we did our best. And maybe last thing that I wanted to say, not to eat into your precious time for the matchmaking. Please do come back to us. Also, I mean, directly to the Innovation Fund or through the BEPA. We have great working relationship. If you find some of the provisions, not clear, or you think that it was not very well done, or that aspect of the application was particularly cumbersome, we would love to hear your feedback, because it's the first time that we do that. Some of you maybe actually come to the Innovation Fund for the first time, so also you might have general feedback on the Innovation Fund. It's really great to have your feedback from the practitioners, and we listen to that very, very carefully when we design the future calls. I don't know yet actually where we go for the next years, on which sectors we focus and so on. But yeah, on batteries, you saw that the commitment was for the next 3 years. So we have to learn from this first call. So I think with this, I let you start the most interesting part of the day. And I'm also very eager also to listen to your discussions, your presentations, and your questions, and happy to chat during the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really clear, and you set out the goals very well there. Thank you so much. Yeah, what actually is in the box? That's the Innovation Fund. Today we have help from two experts here in the room, Martin Bracken and Federico Sparlero, who can tell us a lot more about actually peel back the difficulties or the complexity that it might look on first sight, but give us some tips and tricks and insights in how an innovation fund application work and what's in it. So please welcome Martin and Federico to guide us through the.
Okay, it works. Amazing. Great. Thank you, BEPA. Thank you, Evelina, also for opening for us. Look, we're tasked with the job to, in 45 minutes, give you all the session, all the contents of multiple info days and multiple resources online. So bear with us. We're going to try and give you the essence of what the Innovation Fund is. We're also very aware that there are people who are very familiar with it and people not so familiar with it. So we're going to try and touch as many bases as possible. Here's a brief outline of what we'll talk about. We'll link on the history of the Innovation Fund, small link to the EU ETS, and then some of you will be more in the construction of your concept. So you have to understand how the eligibility criteria play in your favor or against your favor. And then you also have the applications. We'll spend some time looking at the financials, maybe also some of the GHG, because I think there's some key lessons learned there. Anyone who's done an Innovation Fund application knows that these quantitative aspects are really, really tough. Then we'll have some closing remarks and Q&A. So I think I can start strong and say it's impossible to really understand the Innovation Fund without understanding the basics of the ETS. No, you don't need to understand the linear reduction factor of the carbon cap and trade system that works year by year. No, you don't necessarily need to understand all the countries that have joined and when and what sectors. But I think it's important to understand, one, that the Innovation Fund is directly funded by the EU ETS. There's a clear link, and even in terms of legal provisions, it's all there. Two, the currency of the EU ETS is the allowance, which is euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. And I think that's really relevant when it comes to the cost efficiency, which is the fifth criteria, because you can clearly see there's a link there between, how are people using the allowances to emit and how projects are using basically their credits to avoid GHG. And then last but not least, also to quickly understand how and if your project fits within the Innovation Fund, have a look at the EU ETS. So whilst we're all here, battery or clean tech stakeholders, there's obviously a large part of it that is just industrial decarbonisation. I mean, the EU ETS has been active for around 20 years. It should remain active for another 20 years, I hope. And so this can also give you an understanding of the new sectors that have been included, for example, the mobility or the maritime. They all ties back to the EU ETS. Same with the countries. The projects have to be in the countries of the EU ETS. As you'll see at the very top, we believe there'll be around 40 billion that'll be dispersed from 2020 to 2030, but ultimately it'll depend on the price of the allowance, if it's able to stabilize around a certain price for all these years. Bit of history on the Innovation Fund so far. What we've seen in these last 5 years is actually a lot that has changed. I think it's changed mainly in two ways. The first one is in terms of size. The very first call, we had 1.1 billion euros. It goes all the way to 4.6 or 4.8 for last year. But then secondly, and I'm glad also that Evelina touched on this, there is, or there has been, at least in my opinion, a bit of a shift from at the beginning. Maybe we had this larger decarbonisation angle, and now we really see it as the funding tool that acts as a European response to geopolitical issues. And we'll see, for example, in the IF22, not only is the fund 3 times bigger, but then we started seeing heat pumps at the same time as Russia was invading Ukraine. Then we also saw the hydrogen auction that was introduced last year. And this year, we also have the battery call. So I don't know what's going to happen for the clean industrial deal. I wouldn't be so surprised if there's some mention, some link to the Innovation Fund. For IF23, since, as we mentioned, a key part also of applying to the Innovation Fund is knowing which call you're going to go into, I wanted to briefly cover what has happened in IF23. I won't go too much into detail because the Commission has spent a lot of time giving statistics on who has won in what calls, but at least from my perspective, I can give you this opinion for battery stakeholders, is that in the large-scale call, what we mostly saw was energy-intensive industry winners, and that it was also 10 times oversubscription, which is really, really competitive. In the medium and small scale, we see lower degrees of competition, but again, there's a high variety of technologies. Then for the manufacturing, this is actually, I would argue, the one that has had the most success from the energy storage value chain. We'll see some of the winners in a second. Even in terms of oversubscription, it's quite healthy at around 2, 10, largely more competitive. And then the pilots is where you would want to go if you have a smaller project in mind, because let's say that not only is it accommodating for lower commercial readiness level, but there's also a maximum grant of 40 million euros. So this already gives a bit of an introduction, I think, to the calls that are available. To put some faces on the winners or previous winners of the last calls, well, I can maybe just read them. I mean, we have Viano, we have Sunlight, we have BASF, we have Norfolk Fair. These are not all the winners in the battery sector, but there are some of them. And they really range, as we mentioned, from cell production all the way to upstream components manufacturing. But I think if you understand these, you also have an idea of how you fit maybe perhaps as a project. And yeah, okay, perfect. I was looking for that. There's an excellent resource that I couldn't recommend enough. It's the Innovation Fund portfolio dashboard. You have the full list of winners and even more details about the projects that have won and how they compare to yours. IF available calls. So we know that there's around 4.6 billion euros available. I mean, I won't go into each section of every entrance. The ones that are the most important, I think they'll appear, that I think for the stakeholders today are the pilot, the clean tech, and the battery manufacturing. Maybe more specifically on the battery, we already mentioned it, the focus is on cell manufacturing for EVs, and there's 2 new criteria, manufacturing carbon footprint reduction and security of supply. And I think we're going to enter the scoring and the thresholds and how to understand these, but it's quite clear that both of them are marked out of 15 and the entire call is out of 108. So these 2 new criteria will significantly play a role for the applications to come. Obviously, with these new criteria, we also think that there's a unique opportunity for BEPA stakeholders to at least matchmake, whether it be via consortium or whether it be more closely through letters of intent. It's quite clear that these 2 new criteria are pushing the European value chain to come together and to make something like a horizontally integrated battery project. But obviously, the focus still remains EV cell battery production. So with that out the way, I think we can maybe jump into the criteria or eligibility. I always start off with those that may be not so familiar with the Innovation Fund, because before you enter all the criteria that are available, you need to have some ideas of whether you're ready to apply yet or not. The very first one is the financial capacity to match funding. So please make sure your balance sheets are in order. If you have an injection of equity coming in soon, you maybe want to delay your application to the Innovation Fund if you'll need it, because there is an element of matching the funding. The ability to meet your technological output. Obviously, you need to prove that you've been able to successfully deliver a similar project. To respect cumulative funding, we touched on this already, about different EU and national funding being able to be mixed for different parts of a project, and to be in key discussions with key commercial stakeholders, EPC contractors, suppliers, off-takers, key, that it has to be in the location of the EU ETS. And I think this is the part as a consultant that I spend the most time on fighting with certain of the clients. It's that unlike other funds, you probably won't know the grants deep into your application. And I think it's important to be patient with it, to understand that the grants calculation will come from the absolute GHG emissions avoidance and the relevant, well, most importantly, the relevant cost calculations. And maybe even strategically, you may decide to lower your grant amount to be more competitive in the call. So be patient with the grant number. In terms of eligibility criteria, you'll see for the next slides, me and Federico will talk about the different eligibility criteria. There'll be probably a double. You have the general, and then you have the battery for some. So for some of the eligibility criteria, they're exactly the same. What's important to consider is that there's obviously 5 criteria, but there is a cascade approach. So frustratingly for you, if you do apply and you're not able to meet all the thresholds, you may not get full feedback. This is just how the cascade approach works, but this is what we're stuck with. Similarly, for the battery call, the two criteria that have been added are just at the same time as the GHG emissions avoidance for the carbon footprint, and then the security of supply is at the end. If I can talk about the degree of innovation, but I think it was covered perfectly by Evelina. I mean, there's, the innovation fund and the word innovation in general can cover so many terms. I think it is important to consider that it can be a first of a kind commercialization, but that's not necessarily the focus, especially when we'll see for the batteries call. We can have innovative pilot plants, but it can also be innovations on a process level, scaling up, and particularly if you have innovations that are not present in the EU, but are present outside, it can also be regarded as a type of innovation. What's important to consider if you are going for the manufacturing and the pilots is this 2 times weighting for pilots and manufacturing, because obviously it will play against or for you. If looking at the battery, it's actually quite different, maybe perhaps in a good way. I mean, I think a lot of stakeholders are voicing their concern that the most important thing now is to scale up the existing technologies. And I have to say the European Commission really listened here. And what we see is, as Evelina mentioned here, what's most important maybe is final product performances, how much CRM you're using, maybe digital innovations in the process techniques. I mean, this is maybe a different degree to, for example, the pilot score, which is part of the general call. And even in terms of the pure scoring, you'll see it's 6 out of 10, which is much lower than 9 out of 15. For the second criteria, GHG emissions avoidance, this is the part of the presentation where you're going to slowly start seeing more and more equations on the PowerPoint. But I won't jump directly into this. I think it's just important for you to know absolute GHG emissions avoidance. So you have your reference scenario minus your project scenario, and you take that over the first 10 years, and you get your absolute GHG emissions. To get the relative, you just divide it by the reference scenario. And for the absolute, it's really critical because it will come back into the cost efficiency ratio. So it's important to score quite highly on it if you want a bigger grant. Whereas the relative, it's more about just meeting closer to 100%, you'll get a certain score. For that, I think we'll probably jump into that more in detail after. Many updates. Since we are many battery stakeholders today, I thought we could also have a look at the manufacturing carbon footprint. Here, similarly, I think the challenge or the idea was we'll do the same as the GHG emissions avoidance, but for all the upstream emissions, since it is the most carbon intensive step or steps of cell manufacturing. And here, what we have is essentially, equations that look quite similar. We'll dive deeply into them in the next part of this call. But what we do know is that the highest proposal will be marked out of 15, and everyone will be marked relative to that. So that's quite a bit of a new concept or new idea. I have no idea exactly how it will be relative. I don't know if someone will be getting 0 easily. It's all questions I think that we're very excited to see after in the assessment of this first call. And then I think with that, I can surprise the audience and let Federico speak for a while.
Thank you, Martin. So the next eligibility criterion would be the project maturity. I mean, in this specific case, we could spend hours talking about the project maturity, which we don't have. So we'll try to be fast on that. So maturity is normally evaluated under 3 main points of view: technical, financial, and operational. Technical normally relates to the visibility of reaching the promised outputs, financial to the credibility of the business plan and the business model, and the financial projections in general, and the operational maturity to the quality, let's say, and soundness of the implementation. Of the 3, I would spend a little bit more time on the financial maturity. I'm not sure if there are some applicants here already, but if there are, you might know that the financial maturity is probably one of the biggest hurdles for innovation fund applications. Indeed, 37% of unsuccessful applicants from last call failed specifically on the financial maturity. Here on the slide, you can see, sorry, I won't touch that probably. You can see the mandatory documents needed to demonstrate the financial maturity, both quantitative and qualitative. I won't stop on them, maybe some aspects later on. But one of the main points here that I would like to focus on is that the calculations behind the financial maturity are needed for the applicants to know exactly the so-called relevant costs, which we will see in a while, which in turn determines the maximum grant amount that can be asked. This is to reconnect to what Martin was asked, and this is why the grant is not clear since the very beginning, but some calculations need to be performed before knowing it more certainly. Just a quick note on the financial maturity. So we have a series of mandatory documents, but also some other documents that are, let's say, not mandatory, but that sometimes can be critical for the positive evaluation of the financial maturity. I'm talking about all the additional documents that show the support of external stakeholders to the application and the applicants. You can find further detail about this in the Annex 3 of the call. And we're talking about support from shareholders, project lenders or financiers, funders, public entities, off-takers, suppliers. And the Annex 3 provides some details about the kind of information that is needed and, let's say, how these letters of support and memorandum of understanding should be drafted. Just a quick note on this, clearly the bigger the project application, normally the most important this is. I mean, we estimated that for projects where the grant can be from 30 to 40 million on, this can be critical for the credibility of the financial maturity and thus for the good evaluation of the project. Going to the next criterion that Martin already mentioned, this is the cost efficiency. This criterion basically measures how efficient the project is in reducing CO2 equivalent or greenhouse gas emissions. The way it's calculated, it starts from the cost efficiency ratio, which you can see in the first part of the slide, calculated basically as the public funding obtained, innovation fund and other public funding, over the absolute GHG emissions. This needs to be maximum, so basically lower than 200 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent, which is then increased to 2,000 for the pilots. Then this ratio is inputted in the formula of the actual evaluation of this criterion, which can be it goes from 0 to 12 maximum for the scoring. A tiny difference for the battery call. This criterion is slightly less relevant because, as you can see from the bottom of the slide, the maximum scoring for this criterion in the battery call is 3, not 12. So to make an example, if your project is basically asking for 200 million of innovation fund grants, you already have 50 million of public support and you aim to achieve 50 million tons of CO2 equivalent reduction, then your ratio would be 50 and your score for the overall criterion would be 9 out of 12, which is a relatively good one. Going forward to the next criterion, so the replicability. I won't spend much time here. The way the replicability is assessed depends on, indeed, the capacity of the applicant to demonstrate efficiency gains and environmental impacts, how technology is transferred and knowledge shared throughout the deployment, and then if the applicant is indeed able to demonstrate industrial leadership and to increase overall EU competitiveness. This last point is specifically interesting for the battery call, where it has twice as much the weight, and where the call specifically mentions the creation of patents within the EU. So as Martin mentioned, and to conclude on the criteria, there is a second criterion that is just for the new battery call, which is the security of supply. In this specific criterion, we're talking about the demonstrating from the application side that the applicant will not source cathode or anode active materials, or in the future will reduce the sourcing from China specifically. The call does not provide specific ways to calculate this in advance, so I guess that part of this will come after the first evaluation of 2024 call, so at the end of this year. Just to conclude, so this is an overview of the overall scoring for the general net zero call. You can clearly see that each of these criteria has a maximum threshold and a minimum one in some cases, which is the one relevant for the cascade approach that Martin mentioned. For some specific topics, some criteria have a higher weight, such as the degree of innovation for the manufacturing and pilots or the maturity for the manufacturing. In this case, for the net zero general topic, the maximum score is 72. It can be increased by 3 bonus points, depending on whether the applicant can demonstrate net carbon removals or other GHG savings, or in turn, the use or committing to the use of renewable electricity. In our experience, successful applications, and I'm talking about the general topics, score from 60 upwards, let's say. Martin already showed this slide here. This is the same grid, but for the battery call specifically. Just to note that somehow, I mean, some of the thresholds, minimum and maximum, change in this case, and no bonus points are foreseen. We have the additional 2 criteria that we already explained, and the maturity has twice as much the weight for the battery call. We discussed a little bit what is the evaluation and how that works, although that clearly happens at the end of the evaluation period. Normally, what we do at Clarence is trying to understand as much as possible from the very beginning of the project how much the technology and the applicants are aligned with the Innovation Fund. And this is something that most of the consultants in new funding do. What we try to do is perform a preliminary eligibility check with the partners we work on. This is an example of the questionnaire we usually use that is tailored then time by time. And what we try to do is to provide it for free in order to avoid commitments, let's say, before knowing if the application it's going to work, let's say, for the Innovation Fund or not. So this is more or less an overview, very quick, and I mean, we could spend again hours speaking about that, so I'm sorry if I'm rushing a little bit, but if you have questions, we're more than happy to answer. The second part of the presentation would focus a little bit more on how the application works, and clearly this depends on the applicant, on the applications. And so these are examples on how we usually approach it. One first comment about the application is that sometimes applicants tend to underestimate the expertise needed and the effort required for the Innovation Fund application. Indeed, when we speak about expertise, we normally advise the applicants to have an internal core team, including financial, technical, and operational or managerial experts, because all these areas are needed for the application points. In terms of effort, well, an ideal estimation of time needed for an application is 4 to 6 months. Now, we're saying this 3 months before the deadline, so this is not ideal. However, as I was saying, this is an ideal example, how we like to say when we have time to work on it. An estimation of the effort is of actual hours is between 500 and 1,000 hours just for the applicant. And this might increase if external support or consultants are involved. One last point on this slide, and then I will go forward, is something very important when applying to the Innovation Fund is the C-suite involvement. When CEOs, CTOs, CFOs are on board, this is very important for the credibility of the application, but also for the actual ownership of the highest level of the company to show that indeed there is the willingness to go forward with the project. This is an example of methodology on how we normally approach at Clarence Innovation Fund applications. Normally, we start with gathering as much information as possible and assess the application preliminary. Then we start drafting all the supportive documents, which basically are the annexes to support the application. The third step will be the actual application drafting based on the annexes, and then the actual review and final review and submission. When it comes to the first steps, I mean, there are a lot of documents. This is just an example that we normally ask and discuss with our clients, with our partners. We're talking about reports and existing documentation from a technological point of view, business, financial, operational. It can be due diligence reports, market reports, accounting documents, safety protocols, permits of the actual land where the site will be established. There are a lot of documents that indeed show that the project is concrete, can be carried out, and allow us also to understand a little bit more what is needed to write the application. The second step, as I was mentioning, is related to the actual drafting of the documents, both qualitative, let's say qualitative, and quantitative one. When I mean qualitative, which I mean it's qualitative but up to a certain point because we're talking about technical documents, I'm speaking mostly of the feasibility study and the business plan. These are the two main annexes that need to be produced for an application. The feasibility study is the main technical one, which include the description of the project, the feasibility of the technology and of the output, technical and techno-economic or social assessments of the technology, and so on. The business plan, on the other hand, provides information on the business concept, on the partners involved in terms of suppliers and off-takers, but also investors and funders, and to show their commitment. And this is, as I was mentioning, very important for the financial maturity, but also all the other financial information. So the basic assumptions at the basis of the calculations, cash flows, profitability, the funding structure, and so on. And I believe there is an animation. There we go. Yes, starting with this year's call, we also have templates available for the feasibility study and the business plan, which I have to say it's a great help provided from the Commission, which simplifies a big part of the process. Something else that needs to be taken into account also on the qualitative side, let's say, concerns everything that is more operational. So the description of the activities and the work packages, which need to follow strictly the logic provided by the Commission. I won't spend a lot of time in this one, but there might be some constraints in terms of durations of work packages, number of work packages. What's important here is to follow the logic that is provided by the templates and by the application. So the other big part of this relates to everything that is more quantitative. So mostly the quantitative documents refer to the financial maturity, basically the relevant cost calculator, which is a template provided by the European Commission, and a detailed financial model to be provided by the applicant. And then on the technical side, the GHG emission calculator and this new template that is specific for the battery call used to calculate the upstream emissions for the battery applications. Before going a little bit more in detail with the financial quantitative models, let's say, one important concept that, I mean, it's important for who is not familiar yet with the Innovation Fund is the relevant costs. Relevant costs are the net extra costs borne by the project to avoid GHG emissions. They're calculated in this way, the way that the formula shows it. It's basically a present value calculation of the CAPEX plus the present value of maintenance CAPEX and OPEX, minus the present value of operational benefits and revenues. Present value here is calculated for the first 10 years, so similarly to the GHG calculation, and using the project-specific weighted average cost of capital. This is very relevant because it might be different from the one used by the company. Why am I telling you this? Because the relevant costs are extremely relevant to know the exact amount of the maximum grant you can ask, meaning that the 60% of the relevant cost is the maximum grant that applicants can ask for. Relevant costs are calculated, as I was saying, by the RCC, the relevant cost calculator. This is a template provided by the European Commission and collects inputs from the detailed financial model of the applicant in order to calculate these relevant costs. This is just an idea of how we normally approach the file. I won't go in detail about this. The main message here is that this might look like an iterative process, but often it's not. There are a lot of adjustments going back, reviewing the assumptions, because we have two main documents here, the relevant cost calculator and the detailed financial model. We need to make sure that the two models are aligned and the same logics are respected. I will see a little bit more about this later on in the presentation. Just to make some example about the inputs that we normally collect in the financial parts, this is just an idea of what we collect at the beginning. So financing structure, information, profit and loss, cash flow, and balance sheet. Some of these directly influence the relevant cost calculation and also the grant. So they're specifically relevant when doing the calculation in the application. As I was mentioning, the weighted average cost of capital needs to be project specific. Don't be scared of the formulas. I mean, I won't go in detail about that. This is a quite standard WACC formula. The main point here to underline is that the European Commission guideline provides some default values to calculate the project WACC. This, on one hand, simplifies a lot the process of calculating it. On the other hand, although provides less flexibility. So it is important to stick to the logic provided by the European Commission in order to ensure comparability across projects. These are some examples. Sorry.
Parts of the WACC are set by the European Commission, and only, I think, equity ratio is just something where we can look at the WACC. So, I mean, the question is, how can we, looking from the perspective of a company, we have a special WACC from our shareholder. We have to reach this. Yeah, and the WACC we calculated like preliminary is much lower than the one which is from our shareholder. So we do have a little bit concerns, putting this lower WACC in this calculation because we have specific guidelines from our shareholder. Yeah, so it puts us a little bit in a difficult position because it's not a really specific project specific WACC. It's a application specific WACC. Because it's the one from the project is much higher.
Yes, I mean, I would say, let's, Evelina, if you want to, just a quick comment on this, that there are default values. There is the possibility to choose for alternative ones if duly justified. Clearly, even the alternative ones, let's say, are included in these specific tables. So again, the flexibility is quite limited there. That's why it doesn't, let's say, it's not aligned to what normally companies go look forward. Although the logic behind is trying to have a comparison and more in-line comparison across projects. What can I say? I mean, this is something that it's an issue we always encounter while working with Applications Innovation Fund. There is not 1 year when the project-specific WACC calculators is amazing for the applicant. However, I mean, for the moment, at least, I would say this is the rule. This is how it works, the logic behind. I believe this is the current compromise to reach between simplification and, let's say, flexibility for the applicants. Yeah, I mean, as supporters, there is not much we can do. But yeah, I mean, I will let you comment if you need to add something to this.
Observations from both sides, I would say. Yes, there is a drive to have it simplified, so offer default values. You pick from those default values, right? Now, where your flexibility mostly comes is this innovation premium, yeah? Which is not a standard feature in every WACC. I mean, if you open classic textbook on WACC, go Investopedia if you like, I mean, you will not always have innovation premium in there. So this, you can go between 2 and 4%. This is not nothing, especially if you are more equity funded, right? So this is where really your choice comes to also reflect, I mean, these are innovative projects, so we consider that actually they very much needed. Now, indeed, we actually wanted that it is project specific and not company specific, because idea is that it is more risky than the other business of the company. So, but you are telling it's the other way around, right? That you would have even higher WACC than calculated from this. Look, I mean, we look forward to this feedback. I think times are also changing. So where we are now with the innovation premium between 2 and 4%, maybe this is something that we should further discuss. Good to hear that. But yeah, it was a compromise because there was also quite an experience during all the evaluation. You know, experts discussing for hours WACC. I mean, this is maybe not the most important point. So yes, that was the compromise, but good to hear that. We can have a look for the next call, and I would say really use well the opportunities under the innovation premium. That's the only flexibility indeed that you have. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, just on this point, we also had the chance sometimes in doing workshops that involved, let's say, projects with consultants involved at the European Commission. We try to provide direct hands-on feedback sometimes on points such as this one, although this is a very complicated application, so it probably will need time to adapt to the, let's say, the needs and necessities of applicants. Okay, I won't go further in detail with this, just to mention that also for the CapEx input, there is a logic to follow in terms of items and categories. And then once CapEx and financial projections are defined, the file is able to calculate the relevant costs, as we mentioned, and from those, the maximum grant amount as 60% of relevant costs. This is not the grant amount. Applicants can ask for a lower one. As we mentioned before, this might positively impact, for instance, the cost efficiency ratio. However, something that is very important here is that for the grant to be positive, the relevant costs need to be positive, and thus in the first 10 years, the project needs to be unprofitable, specifically for the innovation that will bring forward to reduce CO2 emissions or greenhouse gases emissions. Just one point on this, the file also allowed to break down the whole grant that then the applicant decides to go forward to. There are some important limitations, let's say, and constraints here. The grant can be broken down in some ways that the applicant prefers, but there are some limits, such as no more than 40% of the grant can be allocated before financial close. Financial close is well, or the agreement are reached with external partners. At least 10% needs to be allocated for the operations, and the rest it can be allocated to construction. This is important because applicants sometimes might expect to get all the grant at the beginning or for the construction phase, but this cannot happen for this reason. I mentioned a couple of times the detailed financial model. This is something that is provided by the applicant with their own methodologies and best practices. Ideally, it includes much more detail than the relevant cost calculator in terms of assumptions, financial projections, everything that is at the basis of the calculations. However, as I was mentioning, it is extremely important that this document and the relevant cost calculator are aligned in terms of inputs, outputs, results, the same numbers in synthesis. This is why normally sometimes we tend to work in parallel with the two documents and try to align not the numbers per se, but the logic, because sometimes logic of the estimations adopted by the applicants are not always aligned with what is in the relevant cost calculator. For what concerns the technical parts, I will leave it to Martin.
Thank you, Federico, for reminding us of the horrible times that we've had with the financial calculator. No, but jokes aside, I will also be reminding fresh, great memories about the GHG. It's important to consider that the GHG emissions avoidance is applicable to all the projects, so all the calls, whereas the manufacturing carbon footprint is only for the batteries. I just wanted to include this on the left, as you'll be able to see, that even those that maybe not be doing EV cell manufacturing, you will likely be using a reference scenario that's based on an internal combustion engine, and that your project will be around this battery pack that is fed into an EV. So I think it's important to consider not all of the battery or / energy storage value chain, but maybe quite a few of you will, but there's dedicated methodologies for that. Moving on, I won't be spending too much time on this because we're eating into time for the next session, but I always tell applicants to start with the reference emissions because of all the variables you see. The one that you are in control of, or the one that needs to be defined, is actually this one. Let's see if it works. No, it doesn't work. The energy storage capacity produced in year Y in megawatt hours. That's the most important one. The rest are already on the screen, and you'll be able to find them in the methodology. For the project emissions, this one is a bit more complicated for the battery call. For each of these, you'll find sub-equations, because you have to account for the GHG in the battery cells, in the pack manufacturing, and the EOL, and also in the use phase. But the methodology covers these in great detail. Moving on to, there we go, the manufacturing carbon footprint. Again, we talked or touched a bit on this. The reference emissions is a bit harder to construct. You'll see there's, quite long equations around them, but fret not, there are all these tables that should give you pretty good inputs for these. For the project emissions, and I think this is a key place maybe where BEPA members can be able to matchmake and to look for how to bring out the best of this criterion. But here from the project side, you basically have three sources of project emissions. One is the power, so that's heat, electricity, hydrogen. And so having a substantiation on RPPA would be great. The project upstream or outside components, so having them in your consortium already talking to people in BEPA would be great for this. And similarly for the project raw material, which can also include a recycled fraction. So I think there's many ways in which BEPA members can come together and actually score really well on the project emissions. I also took the liberty to take this screenshot because there's really, really good resources from the European Commission. There's a 15-minute video guide, but that's full of information on how to tackle this new criterion. And then they even made a template for the battery calls that you can check out. That's already been filled. I won't spend too much time on this. I think it's just important to understand, for those of you that have done it, Part B is where you funnel all the information from all the other documents, which is technically the proposal template. And then you get to the submission too. It's important to say that NCPs should be available to help you if you need any help for review. And then you submit. What happens next? Well, as Evelina says, depending on how many projects are submitting, you will hear back typically around September, October, what we've seen. Then you're invited to the grant agreement preparation phase, which can take a couple months. So let's say 1 year after you've applied, you should be starting your project. And depending on the different calls, this timeline is maybe more generic. We try to fit in as many as possible, but it'll take 4 years for FID. Then you have the construction phase, the entry into operations phase, where you have up to 10 years, or let's say the 10 years is important because it feeds into absolute GHG and the relevant costs. And then it's important to note that you have to be able to deliver on the GHG that you promise, up to 75%. Don't ask me what happens if you don't, because I don't think any project has gotten so far yet. But let's say that it is part of the application and the grant agreement that you sign. Grant can be reduced, exactly. You wouldn't be able to get the full grant. So I think you heard straight from her, grant reduction. So please be realistic with your GHG emissions calculations. In any case, there is a criterion for it. In terms of closing remarks, now we move on to the matchmaking. I've seen the documents that were passed around. Consider the strengths, the weaknesses of your project. Try and get the best out of each other. Really here, it's about the European energy storage value chain coming together to bring forward the best that we have to offer. Consider the impact of the new criteria too. They're not negligible. They're up to 30% of the total call. That resubmissions, or if you think you're in a place where your first submission might not be too strong, don't worry, because next year you can apply again. In fact, last year, I think up to 40% of the winners were actually resubmissions. So that's encouraged. As for application support, well, okay, I think you're 3 months away. You should be very far into your application, but please, seek out support from NCPs, consultants, your internal funding team, whether it be also experts on financials, but also LCAs, because you've seen how difficult this can be, because they will ultimately also be feeding advice to your strategic board, who will be making a decision on, how to go forward with such a project and what WACs. Last but not least, the H2IF project. This is the Clarence Coordinated Horizon Europe project, which is a really great hub to find out all the new information on the Innovation Fund. It was funded by the European Commission when we're trying to support Horizon 2020 innovations to reach the Innovation Fund. And so far, we have these 3 partners who are showing very different aspects of the storage value chain and helping them to get to the Innovation Fund. With that, I close. I leave this a bit more on the screen. If you see on the top right here, it's our funding guide that we'll be also sending around, and yeah, our contacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Federico. Thank you, Evelyn, for the additional interventions. Very complex, very different than at least what we've seen in the BEPA space of our Horizon Europe application. Different criteria to think about, different way that we can collaborate together. That was also pointed out by Martin. Before we delve into the matchmaking, are there any questions either for Martin or Federico or for Evelina based on the information shown? It was a lot, so don't worry. I have one. A lot of it been mentioned. It has to be in the EU. Then we saw the winners via Note Freyer. At least I checked. I think Norway was not yet in the in the EU. What's exactly the demarcation on that? So for
geographical scope, it's like I mentioned, the EU ETS. So that I think that would mean EU countries, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. So those are the territories in which you can have an innovation fund project.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if you have that technology provider from outside, need to find a project located in that space. Yeah.
We always say the most important is really where the project is located. You know, let's say that we've talked to a lot of UK clients that are worried because of Brexit. Can they apply? The important is the project location.
So among the points you mentioned, which will be considered as the weight for the proposal, you mentioned that if the material hasn't been coming from China, the active materials, that's going to be a positive point, let's say. So is it active materials, or you are considering binder and conductive additive and, I don't know, solvent and such things as well?
Thanks. A question in the back. Yeah, the microphone comes from behind.
Just to follow up on that point, what do you consider, or where in the value chain do you consider the starting point for cathode active material? Is that mine, refining, or really just the last conversion step?
Well, just, I mean, what makes it cathode active material? I mean, normally when there is a substantial transformation, it confers, that this becomes this material. So the moment that, if it was going for the international trade, it would have become a cathode active material, this last transformation that happened, and therefore it falls under, this customs code. We consider that this is what matters. Obviously, I mean, you could always go upstream as much as you wish up to the raw materials, but this is not the intention.
I have a question on the eligibility. Let's say if a project already has a state aid from a certain country, is that still eligible? Is the project eligible for innovation fund?
I can start.
The horse mouth, I don't know. Yeah, no. So combined public support, this is the term that we use for that, is possible. And it has always been a feature of those regular grants of the Innovation Fund, not for auction, but for the regular grants, yes. So if you already secure that, very good. I mean, you have to acknowledge that in the application. In a way, it is boosting the financial maturity of the project. Look, I mean, part of the funding gap is already plugged. I mean, have some kind of letter of support illustrating that. Now I'm always reminding everybody, it is possible, but there are rules to observe. Those rules don't come from Innovation Fund. For us, we just want to be informed that it happens. But if it is state aid, for every state aid, there are rules on combined support. And I know that this is very difficult for the project to know that. So you have to go to this national authority which provides the state aid and speak with them. Are they okay? Like IPSAI projects, for example, they cannot exceed, combined support cannot exceed 100% of the funding gap. So yeah, for a project, it can be difficult, like what was the funding gap calculated for me under IPSAI, but the competent national authority, the one that was providing those funding, they will know.
Okay, and does let's say I have another question like similar to that. So if we have a state aid for the project, so does that increase the chances for getting an innovation fund?
The secured one, already awarded, you are saying?
Yes, yes.
I mean, it is not because it is public that it is better than the private, but as any source of funding, be it public or private, which is already secured, yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
A last question, Johan, you snatched the last one.
Sorry about that. No, maybe a bit provocative. So in terms of security of supply, you're only looking at active materials. Is there the intention to also expand this towards equipment, manufacturing equipment, other chemicals?
Thank you. Hard to speak about the future. Like I say, we need to take stock where we are, how the applications manage this aspect already. We wanted to make it very concrete. But actually, when I get the follow-up question, so is refining in, etc., I'm thinking, okay, we try to make it concrete, but still it is not yet crystal clear. Good that we discuss it. So yeah, difficult to talk about the intentions. Let's see, how it looks now. But machinery aspect, you will find it under this replicability industrial leadership. We are asking basically, are you bringing European value added? Are you working with the suppliers, European suppliers? By that, we mean those which have operations in Europe. And there is a question on machinery. And why it is so soft, you may ask, because we heard loud and clear that it is not so easy actually to have this machinery from Europe. So we want to see, I don't hide it, that we are also very curious what will come in the applications in that respect. But you see, it's an open question. If you don't have it under this leadership criterion, you can compensate it by something else. Very open approach for the moment. Mm-hmm. The leadership one is in both, but be careful because what is required under it is a bit different under net zero call. I would say net zero is a bit softer. We are asking due diligence. Do you have it? Are you a part of the clusters? In batteries, it's a little bit better. It is. I mean, are you working with European suppliers? Have you had patents in the last 5 years? You will see that it is way more concrete because it also, I mean, technology specific, so we could make it more concrete. So yeah, pay attention. It is not the same kind of response that we expect under the two calls, even though both are those regular grants.
Other chemicals next years?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Evelyn. I think you will stay for a little bit. So if you have further questions, also for Martin and Federico, they'll be around. I heard there's nice desserts outside, so I won't keep you up here too long. I want to just quickly introduce what we're going to do after the break. So we're going to get some coffee to get a little bit hyped up with a lot of information to process. So after the coffee break, we'll break down into 3 groups. The chairs will be rearranged. There will be one group here, which will be group number 1, one group in the back of this room, group number 2, and one in the boardroom across the corridor. That will be group number 3. You should have received a form which says which group you are at which moment. So please look at that, and you can see where you need to go. I don't know many people were. I guess we'll be 13, 14 interested parties per group. We have 25 minutes per round, so limited time. The most important thing is to get to know each other, to quickly know, okay, where do you fit in the value chain? For us, I think it's really important. Just say your organization, say what it does, say who you are, and then go into these criteria and say, okay, on which part can we really offer? Like, okay, if you're a self-producer, it's clear, but what you need maybe for a good proposal. Like, where do you think that you can still gain things on these GHG calculations, manufacturing, CO2 footprint, those kind of things. Again, be brief, and then after 25 minutes, we will let everybody know that it's time to swap groups, and we'll do a second round. 2/3 of the people will move around. Some lucky people are allowed to stay in their seats, and then we'll start again. So you will at least have a chance to get to talk as many people as possible before the end of the day. You can already, of course, start networking now at the coffee. We try to already facilitate a little bit by color coding your badges. People who are involved in cell manufacturing are red. Manufacturing suppliers were supposed to be dark orange, but almost red as well. So apologies for that. I think materials providers are orange. Recycling is purple, and others are white. For the observers here in the room, so the people who like from the European Commission or the speakers, feel free to join whatever group you want after the matchmaking, just to eavesdrop. I didn't put you on a special group, but if you have any questions on the matchmaking, come to me during the coffee break. And then for now, I wish you a nice coffee break. We'll reconvene at 4:30 in the different areas.